Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran trying to score a co-write on an Amco commercial, or else a scrappy upstart trying to get $100 Venmo to you for scoring an Instagram ad, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of August 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Patrice who drove a Mitsubishi Talon with those flip-up headlights and who was always trying to sell you Southern Comfort in Dasani bottles. And old Patrice would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I think that we're building something of a little kind of community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you might choose to pay for because you dig the show and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would give the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who signed up to do that over at Patreon. And if you're not in a place to do that right now, I totally get it. That's no problem. You could still help out our show for free. There's two ways that you could do that. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, which is free. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show with somebody that you think might dig it. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. It was a pleasure, as you'll hear, to speak with Amy Ray, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation. Our guest this week is a legendary songwriter whose music has flourished from DIY record consignment shops to the Billboard Top 40 and everywhere in between. Amy Ray is a founding member of the seminal American folk duo, the Indigo Girls. The group began in Georgia in the mid-1980s and took to the national stage with their hit song, Closer to Fine. In 1990, they won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album. From there, they went on to be an integral part of the Lilith Fair, a traveling music festival created by Sarah McLachlan, which featured solely female solo artists and female-led bands. There, they shared the stage with other headliners such as Tracy Chapman, Jewel, Sheryl Crow, and many others. The festival was a major cultural touchstone for American life in the 1990s. Amy's recorded for Epic, Columbia, Vanguard, and Rounder Records. She's collaborated with Joan Jett, Michael Stipe, Justin Vernon, and many others. The Washington Post described the Indigo Girls style as emotional, edgy folk rock, a blend of familiar 60s folk revival harmonies and Athens, Georgia-bred rock. The New York Times has said of the Indigo Girls that they've built a career in which message has been inseparable from melody. An American songwriter has said that the Indigo Girls have always been the essence of a populist band. Amy has also maintained a vigorous solo career under her own name. There would be few people I could think of who were more deserving of the title of a working songwriter. She was kind enough to give me a few moments on the phone earlier this month, and I got to hear about her journey so far. Amy Ray, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. It really is an honor to have you here. Can you start by talking to me and to our listeners about what music looked like in your household growing up in Georgia? What are some of your most formative experiences with music early on?
Well, very early on, my parents listened to the Carpenters, like Burt Bacharach, Tony Bennett, sort of things like that, not as much like folk music or anything, even in the realm of kind of what I do. I think Burt Bacharach was probably, for me, really stayed with me as a songwriter and still one of my very favorite songwriters of all time. And as far as melody, he's the one that I really study.
Really?
For melody. Yeah, I'll always want to achieve, I don't know, something about his melody. I can never, it's not my style, but it's the way that he writes a melody is just something I want to be able to do, and that craftsmanship. And the Everly Brothers, they listened to the Everly Brothers some, and that songwriting team, Boudreaux and I'm trying to remember the Boudreaux and what's the name of that songwriting team from the Everly that did the Everly Brothers. I'll come up with it in just a sec. They were important, and I think what really happened to me is my sister was 5 years older than me, and she had a massive, record collection, and Boudreaux Bryant, Elise and Boudreaux Bryant. That's who I was trying to think of.
Okay.
They wrote all these Everly Brothers songs, and so that was another. When I look at songwriters, that team. For me, when I'm looking at songwriters, my first thing is I'm always looking at songwriters that can write melodies, because that's the mystery to me. How do you write a good melody? How did somebody like Hank Williams write such brilliant songs with 3 chords,
right,
and have a different melody for each song? Like how did Dolly Parton do it? Some of the great country writers, but in my house, my sister was listening to a lot of the bands from the Woodstock era, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Allman Brothers, and Leonard Skinner, Southern rock, and then some of the folk stuff like James Taylor and Carole King, Joni Mitchell. And then I sort of, I hooked into Elton John really early on as a kid, and had, just even in second grade, started listening to Elton John and was obsessed with him. And so that was an artist that I had a lot of records by, and like, like I had a lot of like Partridge Family records, and I had a lot of church music. Like, I sang in choir in church, and I always went to church camp. So I had a lot of books that were like song books from church camp with all those, Cat Stevens and like the folk songs, that you would sing, like Morning Has Broken and stuff like that. So, and then Christian songs. I had a lot of camp songs that I knew, Kumbaya and such. So that was like early. And then, I definitely discovered other music as I went on that made everything make sense to me, like punk rock and alternative music and stuff that made me feel aligned with myself inside,
Right, but those forms tend to focus a lot less on melody, though, than those earlier forms that you were talking about. Those
I know.
Other songwriters.
I know. I think what it was about these later forms was that the lyrics, when I was listening to the earlier stuff, sometimes, unless it was like the Woodstock era and there was songs about peace or whatever, and then Bernie Taupin was such a good storyteller.
Right.
But I think like when I started listening to punk rock, I realized that like the messages and the liberation of self and the philosophy of like community, but in a way that was about the other, really spoke to me. And so it freed me up lyrically, I think, to try to, explore those lyrical sort of dimensions of just being like so true to myself, and be more open. And so when I look at my songwriting now, there are certain artists, that I go to for poetry, like Ricky Lee Jones or Patti Smith, and then other artists like Burt Bacharach, who I might, or even like the Shins. They write great melodies. Some artists that I would go to for melody, and I would listen to them for inspiration, and like, how did they make that happen? What chord changes did they use, and how can you change the chords underneath a song that you've written to make the melody seem different? Things like that. And those are all things I thought about by working with, I think I think about like Mitchell Froom, that producer that worked with the Indigo Girls on a couple of records. He's the one that introduced me to that idea that you can have a chord progression and a melody, but then if you change the chord progression underneath that melody, it changes the way the melody hits you. And I had never in my life done that ever. Right. And so, every producer I've worked with since him, really, I've tried to purposely work with people that have a sort of a different take on songwriting, so I could actually sit down and learn more about how chords work underneath melody, how different ways to look at song structure. And just, it's like a total pursuit of mine to get better. And I spend a lot of time writing and playing around with not being so precious on my songs anymore. When I write it, not being like, really trying to get to a place where I'm not so married to it that I'm not touching it or breaking it apart to put it back together again. And sometimes it's hard to do that, but for me, it's the only way I learn how to be better at what I'm doing, So it's still like a massive pursuit for me. I'm just a student,
Well, I want to kind of dive in on a couple of those things that you mentioned there. The first one being the idea of replacing chords after you've already written a song. Can you explain on a nuts and bolts level how that works? Like, do you finish an entire song, wait a couple days, and then come back? Or is that something that you're doing as you're writing the song? Like, how do you toy with those chords and the tension between them and the melody?
The first time I did it, I had written the song called True Romantic. And I remember this so well. I sent the song to Mitchell Froom, and he sent me back a chart where he had taken all the chords and changed them. From like maybe to the relative minor instead of the major, things like that, and made it had started out as this very basic song with very basic chords, and then he like threw in like can't remember. I think he threw in a B minor instead of a D, and he changed. And in some places, he went, instead of the major chord, he actually used not even the relative minor, but the minor chord. And so my first introduction was someone taking a whole piece of music, changing everything in it, and showing me how I could experiment like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then because that happened, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so sometimes when I'm writing, I will do that within the writing process. So I'll record everything while I'm going, and I'll like play a song and have one set of chords, and then I'll listen to that and I'll write them down, and then I'll like try to put different chords under that verse where I don't have to change the melody. And I don't know a lot about music theory, so I just try different things. And then I'll write down what I'm trying, and I just make notes about everything. And I'll do it in the midst of writing the song. Now, sometimes when I've finished a song and I've sat with it for, a week or so, I work with this guy, Brian Spicer, he's actually the front of house sound person for Tedeschi Trucks band, but he also produces all my solo stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'll send him a song, and he'll be like, have you thought about playing this chord instead of this chord? And at first I'll be like, I don't want to talk about that right now. Call me back. Because I'll be like, okay, I got to get my wits about me, and be able to like give it up. So then I think about it, and I'm good. And so then he'll send me suggestions, and that'll lead to others. Like he'll say, can you put this chord in this place instead to keep the melody the same? Or have you tried to change this one note of the melody and put this chord under there? And I'll try to do what he's asking, and then it'll lead me to have my own ideas. So, because sometimes it's like the melody is not, it's like I've got it finished, I've sung it, I've recorded it, and I've listened to it a few times, but I can't figure out why it's not as good as it could be. Like I know something's missing. And the first thing I go to when that's happening is changing chords underneath. It's just a way to break it open. It's not necessarily going to be the end result, but it's a way to change your perspective. And for me, it's easier to do that first than to try to change the melody first over the same set of chords. Because I don't know why, it's just something where in my mind, I need to find a way to bust up what I've done and start somewhere, so that's what I'll do.
Now, you mentioned you have to have a willingness. You have to, as you said, not be married to the original song that you write to be able to take input like that. But how do you balance? You seem like to me, and you've always seemed like to me, an artist that has a very clear vision of where she wants to go forward. How do you balance having a clear vision of your own, but also not being married to specific choices and taking feedback from people that you trust?
Well, because the vision is like it's like a general kind of overarching vision of like, I don't want to get stagnant. I want to make a better record than the record I made last time. Or I want to or maybe I'm making a record where I'm like, okay, I want all the songs to be songs that I could just sit down and play on one guitar and sing, and they would still hold up. There might be like little things I'm thinking about. And within that, you can be open, So, I mean, I used to be very rigid, and not want to change things, but I also wasn't like getting better as a songwriter. And I think when I started to be willing to listen to people and know that you don't have, just because you change a song doesn't mean you can't go back to the way it was, right? So I've definitely changed songs at the suggestion of producers that did not make them better and didn't realize it until too late. And that's also a mistake, So that's just, you got to be, it's not that you don't, it's just, you have to realize, like, open up and change it and try all these things, but also listen to everything and give it some space and listen again. And if it doesn't hit you, then the change that you make is not right. You just have to trust your instincts, and also know that your first instinct as a songwriter, when you just have finished the song, is probably going to be to hang on to what you just finished. And so you need to be willing to just listen And for me, it's like, that's my goal, is to be open-minded. So if I'm talking to Brian about a song and he starts suggesting things that are just like making me mad, then I know I'm not ready to talk about it yet. And so I'll be like, just give me a minute, and I'll like, give me a couple of days and let me write the lyrics and the chords out in the chart, and let me make sure I know how everything works. And then let's talk about it. And because I won't be so married to it, because it'll be more sort of scientific at that point, you know? So I just kind of compartmentalize it into this like moment of like more intellectual, like, how do these things work? Mechanical is a better way to put it. It's a mechanical kind of perspective of songwriting. Yeah. And I learn a lot from it. And knowing that I learn a lot from it means that it's rewarding me. So it's worth doing. You know what I mean? So that's how I get to that place.
You also mentioned in this kind of journey of going forward to get better, you know, song to song, album to album, that you'd worked with producers and other songwriters that had changed the way that you thought about song structure. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned about song structure that you didn't know when you first began?
Oh boy. Wow, that's a great question.
Or even better, just what's a good trick? What's a good hack that you can go to?
Yeah, I know, right? You know, one thing I learned is that your bridge needs to be as good as your chorus, and your bridge should almost be so good that you want it to be your chorus. And then if you can write a great bridge, sometimes that bridge is better than your chorus, and so you need to make that the chorus. That's one thing I've learned. I think bridges are really important, and Kristen Hall, who used to write for Sugarland a long time ago and has written a lot since, she taught me that the bridge is fundamental, and it's just a tool that can make a whole song just shine, you know. And so I rarely write a song without a bridge, although, you know, there certainly are many songs without bridges that are great. But for me, I'm in that phase right now in my life where I like to write a good bridge, like the Beatles did, you know. I'm trying to think of other things I've like, you know, one thing that I've learned also is like to try to, when I listen back to a song that I'm working on, one thing I'm struggling with right now in a song is that there's a melody in the verse that reoccurs in the end of the chorus. And I know that I could just leave it, you know, it happens in folk songs and happens in country songs, but I know the song's going to be better if I figure out a way to not have that repeat, that to have the theme of the verse be in the verse and the chorus have something different happen, because if you don't, then you don't have these two moments that are distinct from each other and useful dynamically. So, you know, that's what I'm doing right now, is trying to figure out a way to make a satisfying melody in the chorus that doesn't repeat something from the verse. And the way that you do that is just work. I mean, my biggest thing I learned is that you have to work. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't. One book that I read that taught me the most about writing was a book that Stephen King wrote called On Writing. Yeah. And it's, you know, he's not a songwriter, but he understands songwriting, I think, because he's kind of a musician. But just the way he talks about the discipline of writing and how you do it and the mechanics of it helped me learn to work at things. So there are hacks for things, but there are mostly like long days of trial and error, you know? And there's not a silver bullet, you know, a lot of times. I mean, the best hack I have is to try different chords under the melody, because it breaks it open. So that's the best one I have. And then the other thing I have is, a lot of times, if I don't just work on one song at a time. Right. I work on like 5 songs at a time. And what happens when you're doing that is really cool, because there might be something in one song that you're writing that actually doesn't work at all for that song, but don't throw it out, because it might work on another song. Right. And that's one thing I've learned, is just save your pieces, you know, just document everything. Have it on, whether it's a voice memo or however you do things, GarageBand or whatever, Pro Tools. I document everything, and I keep snippets, because when I'm looking for something to make a song work, I can't remember everything I've written and all the snippets I have. So I just listen back through to everything that I have in my voice memos and what I've labeled and stuff. And half the time I find something in there that's what I needed. And so it's like, that's another thing. It's like, just don't discard anything. Even if it's not a song yet, even if you don't think it works at all, it might work in another context, and it might lead you, if you try it in another context, it might lead you to something in that song. So I guess I just, I feel like it's like doing a crossword puzzle, like you're looking at all these clues and you're trying to fill in all these different spaces all at the same time, and just go to the one that you can fill in that moment, and don't worry about all the other ones, and then go. And then that, having had done that, will help you with the other things. And so for me, everybody's got a different style. I know people that only write one song at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how they do it, But for me, it helps me to be writing more than one song, because I can lose my steam on something and go work on something else. And for some reason, it's just exercising that muscle, I guess. It takes me back to the other thing that I was missing on that other song.
It can also feel like, if you're working on something that just isn't working, it almost sometimes feel like if you go to another song, it feels like you're playing hooky from what you're supposed to do. And that's actually fun. Playing hooky,
That's a great way to put it. That's totally true. That's totally true. And yeah, and I think, like lyrically, when I'm working on lyrics and I'm stuck, I always use a thesaurus and a rhyming dictionary and look up stuff. And I rarely use what I find.
Right.
But what it does is it just breaks open the vocabulary in my head, because a lot of times when you use a thesaurus, like the words that you find like sound unnatural to what you're writing, right? The context is wrong or something. But it does make you think about what you're really trying to say, And
yes.
One of the things I do for lyrics is, if I'm like trying to think about what I'm really trying to say, what I do is for 15 minutes, or so, I don't think about writing lyrics. I just write out by hand what I'm trying to say, as if I'm talking to somebody. I'm trying to say this, like journaling. And then I go back and I read it, and I figure out how to take that and make it into the poetry of the song, right? Because when I'm writing the lyric, I'm not like, I'm getting stuck on the lyric, and I'm forgetting that I'm actually trying to say something, know?
Yes.
And so I try to figure out what I'm trying to say. And then another trick that a friend taught me, actually Brian taught me this too, is I sometimes will read my lyrics to him, over the phone. And when something doesn't feel right when I'm reading it, it's usually because it's not working, like in the song too. And it's so, because at first when he said that, I was like, oh, that's, I'm not going to do that. I'm the lyricist here, like that's really like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Being like closed-minded. And because I'm not even that good, like it's just, you get defensive, it's like, I don't even think of myself as that good. I just, in that moment, I get defensive.
Right.
But I tried it a couple times, and it really works,
Yes.
So for lyrics, it's super helpful to do that and feel the pacing and the phrasing of it and stuff, and how it lands and all that.
When you're talking about this process of putting this work in, when you're putting in these work days of breaking these songs apart like this, trying the different melodies for the end of the verse versus the end of the chorus, trying these different lyrical attacks at the song, how does that work in your workday these days? I've noticed over the last year during COVID, you've kind of switched to a singles model where you seem to be recording from home and having musicians record from home as well. Here's my question. How much has your writing process become integrated with your recording process at this point? Are you recording as you write?
Well, we were. My solo band, that is what it was, integrated to where I was like writing a song and Brian and I would talk about it. And then my guitar player in that band, Jeff, and I would talk about it with Brian. And I kind of would start there. And sometimes a song wouldn't be completely finished, but I would go ahead and record, to like a click track, and have a guitar, track with like a scratch vocal on it, right? That was recorded separately so we could take it out. And then as they are recording parts, I would be fine tuning some lyrics, which worked for me for like 3 songs. But then we've decided that we're going to record in December in a studio because we just want to work together in the same room. And so now I'm switching back to this other model where I'm actually finishing the song, or trying to finish 5 songs to take into the studio or 6 to record in a week. So the model now is different, because I like that other model, but we really like to be in the same room, and it was fun to do it the other way for a while, but I feel like as a band, it's just more fun to get in a room together and try things, So now it's kind of it's almost like a mashup of the 2 ideas, because I'm trying to finish the songs, but at the same time, we've got to get sort of pre-production done remotely because I'm touring and
sure,
they all have things to do too. And so we're sort of like, I've just finished a couple of songs and Brian and I are working on the arrangement, but I've already demoed them once. So it's kind of a cross-pollination of the 2 ideas, because it's a hybrid, because I've demoed them once with Jeff, but I'm also going to change them because we heard the demos, me and Brian did, and we realized that I was like, this has to change. I'm not done with that. This lyric needs to be tweaked. And so I just demoed him with Jeff because we were in the same town together for a couple of days, and he has a studio, and I was like, let's just play together. And then we decided to record these songs.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of it, I'm not going to have a chance to do that probably. So we're going to like just do pre-production remotely as if we were kind of creating a record, but digitally with each other, but nothing has to be done. So we'll get to a certain place, and then we'll go to the studio, and the first part of each day will just be the arrangement of the song, and then we'll record it because we go to tape. So everything has to be kind of set. And then we record it live to tape.
Are you going to take anything with you from that COVID process? Is there anything that you're going to take from?
Yeah, I think like what we learned in that COVID process was one thing that we can take with us is I can have the drummer and bass player do rhythm tracks, and we can go back and forth with each other for a while on what works, before we get there. And one thing that I realized is that it really helps to hear it on tape, or on digital or to hear it, And so, and people that have their own studios that are in the band can do that kind of stuff. So we'll take that idea, and the songs that we've already recorded we'll use on the new record as well. Even though we didn't make them to tape, we'll probably still put them on the new record. And then I think, like right now, I'm working with Brian on songs that I'm writing right now, and I'll send him like an early draft usually. And when it's really new and I know it's not done yet, because if I can see how it hits him and how it hits, it helps me to, it's not just like whether he likes it or not. It's like just having a mirror or something to bounce off of is helpful to me. Because usually I have Emily when I'm doing Indigo Girls stuff. So
right.
I'm used to collaborating, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so and I think, I started doing that more during COVID, one song at a time, bouncing things off of him instead of having 10 songs done and sending them all together. This is kind of nice to just like, okay, this is the first draft. How is it hitting you? These are the things I'm not sure about. Tell me what you think. And then go back and that. And then Zoom is actually super helpful because I can get with him. Like if we're going to try to figure out what the drum track should be, I'll just have a Zoom with him and me and the drummer and the bass player, maybe the guitar player. And we can sit in real time and play some drums beats, and we can kind of be like, yes, no, I like that, I don't like that kind of thing, So that'll be a tool that we still use. But as far as like writing goes, I mean, the biggest thing I learned during COVID was that even when you don't feel like writing, you have to try.
Right.
Because I think there were moments when I just was like, oh my God, like I should be using all this time wisely and writing and like making records and stuff. But I'm just so like paralyzed by being, you know, and I'm like everybody was, right?
Yep.
But I just learned that I have to make myself do it because actually it made me feel a lot better. Like I just on a therapeutic level, just to be doing something that was creative helped my heart, you know, so much. And if I didn't write for 2 weeks, when I got back to writing, it's like I felt so rusty and not exercising those muscles and stuff. And it just was harder, you know, and I guess what I discovered is the joy of songwriting again, you know, it's like, it doesn't have to be this like laborious process, you know, everything doesn't have to be great. I'm never going to be Bob Dylan, you know, so I'm going to just write because it's joyful and it's interesting and it's a mechanical thing too that kind of helps you feel better for some reason. I don't know why, you know, but which is the reason why like anybody that wants to write should be writing, you know, and we'll be a better world for it, you know.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. One of the things that I admire so much about Amy is the way that she's integrated critiques from collaborators that she trusts into her process. That can be a very important part of maturing as an artist. Of course, though, criticism does have its limit, and sometimes it can turn absurd. And our conversation on this subject reminded me of a wonderful poem by the poet Billy Collins that takes a wry look at creative critique. It's entitled The Workshop. I might as well begin by saying how much I like the title. It gets me right away because I'm in a workshop now, so immediately the poem has my attention, like the ancient mariner grabbing me by the sleeve. And I like the first couple stanzas, the way they establish this mode of self-pointing that runs through the whole poem and tells us that words are food thrown down on the ground for other words to eat. I can almost taste the tail of the snake in its own mouth, if you know what I mean. But what I'm not sure about is the voice, which sounds in places very casual, very blue jeans, but other times seems standoffish, professorial in the worst sense of the word, like the poem is blowing pipe smoke in my face. But maybe that's just what it wants to do. What I did find engaging were the middle stanzas, especially the fourth one. I like the image of clouds flying like lozenges, which gives me a very clear picture. And I really like how this drawbridge operator just appears out of the blue with his feet up on the iron railing and his fishing pole jigging. I like jigging, a hook in the slow industrial canal below. I love slow industrial canal below. All those L's. Maybe it's just me, but the next stanza is where I start to have a problem. I mean, how can the evening bump into the stars? And what's an obligato of snow? Also, I roam the decaffeinated streets. At that point, I'm lost. I need help. The other thing that throws me off, and maybe this is just me, is the way the scene keeps shifting around. First, we're in this big aerodrome, and the speaker is inspecting a row of dirigibles, which makes me think this could be a dream. Then he takes us into his garden, the part with the dahlias and the coiling hose, though that's nice, the coiling hose, but then I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be. The rain and the mint green light, that makes it feel outdoors, but what about this wallpaper? Or is it a kind of indoor cemetery? There's something about death going on here. In fact, I start to wonder if what we have here is really 2 poems, or 3 or 4, or possibly none. But then there's that last stanza, my favorite. This is where the poem wins me back, especially the lines spoken in the voice of the mouse. I mean, we've all seen these images in cartoons before, but I still love the details he uses when he's describing where he lives. The perfect little arch of an entrance in the baseboard, the bed made out of a curled black sardine can, the spool of thread for a table. I start thinking about how hard the mouse had to work night after night collecting all these things while the people in the house were fast asleep. And that gives me a very strong feeling, a very powerful sense of something. But I don't know if anyone else was feeling that. Maybe that was just me. Maybe that's just the way I read it. One of the things that I really admire about you has been your ability to navigate very different eras of the music business, COVID being a perfect example. Hopefully that was a one-off for all of us. But could you talk to our listeners who weren't around for what the music business looked like in the late 80s and early 90s when you cracked into it? It was a very different time. Can you kind of describe the lay of the land of the music business when you broke into it?
Sure. I mean, it's funny because I have friends that are young now that they pine for those days. They wish that they could experience that, because to them, the ideas of like going to a college radio station with your guitar and, you know, having some DJ willing to play your music and no one else is doing it, and it's so independent, you know, and just kind of the DIY mechanisms of like going to a record store and consigning records, and just like that access that's so visceral. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people that didn't experience that are like fascinated by that, and also probably fascinated by the idea that like you sold records, like it was like a way that you helped make a living, you know,
right.
It's by actually selling music was not free, which I have no problem with. You know, the model now, I think it's great. I mean, it's just gives so much access, but I think for some people, yeah. So like basically, you know, Emily and I we would, you know, get some money and go into a studio and record a couple songs, like for our first single in '85. And we went to a record pressing plant and had the little tape and got it mastered and pressed the record. And, you know, we had our singles. And then we physically would take them around to record stores and leave them with 20 copies. And, you know, they would give us a receipt, and we'd go back and collect the money mm-hmm. when they were sold. And we would go to radio stations or mail them. We'd do a big mailing to all the stations, the college radio stations. They were all independent. And then the community radio stations, like the ones that are not commercial. Like anything left of the dial is what we would say, you know, left of the mainstream radio dial. And you could make an appointment, or you could just go in usually and just, you know, have the single with you and say, put like a little typed up bio and say, this is us. We're, you know, I want you to listen to this, see if you'll play it. And you do that, and then you call the station once a week and you find out if they played it. And you have your list of 100 stations, and everybody calls stations and get your friends to call and request the song. And that's how you did things. And you have like a little universe of like, so if you had like, let's say you have 3 gigs, and one's in Atlanta, one's in Nashville, and one's in Durham, you would like say, okay, what are the independent newspapers in Durham, like the art paper that talks about music? What is the independent record store, and what's the radio station? And you would take each one of those entities and you would be in touch with them, and you try to get them to promote your music and promote that show. And then you would do it in each town that you're going to. And that's how you would get your music out there, and that's how you would get the information about your show out there. And then you would go play, and you know, the record store would have your record, and the local paper would have talked about your show, hopefully. And you just do that over and over again to all the towns that you're playing in when you're independent. And like, and then the next thing we did is we made a full-length record, and we did the same thing. And then after we had done that just completely on our own, I got a record distributor, and I think Rough Trade was the first group I worked with, I think. And basically I just called them and sent them the music, and I said, you know, we need a distributor because that's the only way we could get it into as many stores as we wanted to get it into without having to physically take it to the stores ourselves. And so that was the next step up, you know, like we got a distributor. So, because we were touring in more places, and so we needed to get the record into more than, it wouldn't just be 3 towns, it would be 20 towns. And so we couldn't physically do that. So this way the record would be sent to all those stores before we came to play. And that's how they worked back then. They worked based on, a lot of times, on a band's tour schedule, or if a radio station was playing your song. You had to have something going for the record store to feel like carrying your record, which is the same as it ever was. It's the same now. It's just that we don't have many record stores.
Right.
But so that's how we would do it. And then, you know, eventually we had our own label, and we did that with our own distributor and just kept track of everything ourselves. And college radio played us a lot. And that's how we got the word out, is left of the dial community and college radio. And then we got a record deal with Epic, and, you know, we didn't have to do all that stuff ourselves anymore, but it works the same way. I mean, they had, you know, reps in each town that called the record stores and then you had a publicist that called all the independent papers, and we were still played on college radio. And that's really how it worked until like REM, like they sort of had a format in radio that was called, was it called album oriented rock? Was it AOR? It might've been AOR. I was trying to remember what it was called, but it was like bands like REM, I mean, even like Rage Against the Machine, like all the bands that were like not commercial, quote unquote, would be played on this other kind of radio. Mm-hmm. And we would get on those, we would be on college radio first. And if it did really well at college, they would start playing us on those stations. And we at one point crossed over into what would be considered the top 40 radio stations, like more mainstream, like for Closer to Fine, and I believe Galileo too. But mostly we were in this arena that was just very much like bands that were more left of center, and they could be rock or folk or whatever, you know. They were all kind of songwriter based, but it was different styles of music. And those stations don't really exist anymore. It's more like, you know, Sirius XM has like broken it down to very, you know, specific things. And then college radio still is happening, but it's just, I mean, I think college radio actually is coming back around to the way it was when we were young, because I listen to college radio in Atlanta now, and I notice that it's starting to kind of get back to that place of locals only type shows and, you know, stuff like that. So I still think it's a really important entity, actually. But you don't carry your vinyl there anymore. Usually it's like an MP3 or whatever, you know. But I think for us, it was all the model was like, you have an ecosystem, and it's made up of an independent record store, an independent station, and an independent newspaper. And that's what you use, and a club. And that's how you get, that's your whole world. And you just constantly know everywhere you go where the community is, and that's the community is made up of those things. And I think now it's just different because, well, you know, it's a completely different world, but one thing that's still important is for us as like the kind of music we do. I mean, I think it depends on what you do as musicians. The live show is still super important. And so, you know, that's the biggest ingredient is like getting in front of people and playing and create community and get your songs out there that way. But I think there's a lot of bands that don't do it like that. And it's fine. You know, it's just a different model, like where you do, maybe you make, your music is all video. You know, you do like what OK Go did, which is make some incredible videos and really get it out there with that, you know, or you just play, you do streaming all the time and just, you know, go on Twitch and have like a channel and stream yourself constantly. So I think it depends on what you're doing, but for our kind of music, singer-songwriters, you got to get in front of people and play, you know, because that's the only way you know that everything works, really, you know.
It is. The singer-songwriter thing, it still does feel like a bunch of almost pastors that have small churches with small followings, and you got to go and be with your congregation. Like they want to come feel it in person. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I do, because COVID sort of taught us that too, because, you know, the live streams were great and intimate, but you know, they can only go so far. I mean, honestly, you know, I think at some point people they want to be in the same space, you know, and with each other too, you know, not just with the person playing, but with each other.
Speaking of how important live shows have been for you and also for the Indigo Girls, of course, that makes me think of Lilith Fair. And, you know, you were talking about how for a moment you guys kind of crossed over into top 40 when Lilith Fair was around, when it began in the 90s. It was this cultural touchstone and juggernaut. And I've always wondered what it's felt like to be an artist who is sort of, as you've put it before, like kind of like a left of center indie artist, when the cultural zeitgeist comes by and puts its stare on you for a moment or two. What did that feel like as the artist in the middle of it?
I mean, it felt great. You know, those were, you know, we've had moments that are like that, you know, here and there. Usually because of the company we keep, you know, it's usually like REM was helping us or Lilith Fair or something was happening, you know, that really got us into that moment where the light shines on you that's different from the other light you're used to, you know. Mm-hmm. It feels good. It feels it's validating. It can be really exciting. And you know, I guess, you know, whenever that kind of stuff happens, we're just like, we know that we've always known, even in the beginning when things like that happened, that they were like moments, you know what I mean? And that they weren't really necessarily going to last. And we always used to say, you know, you got to ride the wave. Like, don't freak out and like, you know, clamp down or something. Like, just enjoy it, you know, because, and make the most of it. You take the most of your opportunity because it's probably not going to happen again. That's how we would always say it. So Lilith Fair was one of those times. I mean, Lilith was, you know, it was AAA radio, and like they were playing a lot of women, and Lilith was super successful, and it was really fun, you know, and fun to be in all that. That's the best way. It was like a constant like summer camp of music and fun, you know, and it was, I don't even know, like we made a lot of friends during that time that we still know, and I can't even like quantify what it brought us. You know, it brought us a lot of success, you know, on a business level, but on an emotional level, validation, relationships that we still have, memories, and songwriters that we know now that talk about, that are much younger than us, you know, that saw us when we were doing Lilith and how that informed what they were doing. And that feels really good. And, you know, so that was Sarah did a really good thing, I'll say, and I think also we learned a lot from it. We learned a lot of important things, which was like, it's a women-focused festival, but the majority of the people in the bands and the crew were still men. Mm-hmm. And so what does that say about our industry? So that was important to see that and to realize it and know that we needed to work harder to get more women engineers and more women guitar tech and more women in the bands, And then we learned that music scenes are still very segregated, and that, to get a festival like that and to try to truly integrate and have different kinds of music and people of color, in the audience as well as on stage, that you might have to promote your event differently and set it up differently and just make sure you're looking at the infrastructure and that it's informed by this drive to integrate more. And I think we learned that that's harder than it seems, and that it's not just, you can't just do it in one festival. It's a lifelong pursuit. So there were so many things we learned. I mean, Lilith is one of the most significant things that's ever happened, in our lives. And because of all the lessons it had, but also all the gifts, So it was really good.
I hear you be able to talk about something like Lilith Fair and coming it through that lens, which is so level-headed and realistic and forward-thinking, where entertainment is just littered with people that handled things the wrong way and let it go to their head, And I also hear you talk about, the way that you approach songwriting and let other people come in and you kind of humble yourself. You seem as an artist to have many kind of personality traits that you don't always associate with an artist. You're very entrepreneurial. You're very inclusive as a creator and as a businesswoman. How do you... This is a weird question to ask a person about themselves, I suppose, but I'm just very curious. How do you balance those two parts of your personality? There's kind of like a chaos and order element going on there that you seem to walk very...
I know. I don't know. I mean, I guess, to be honest with you, I don't think of myself as that. The artist side of me, I just feel like is still such a student, and I have so many friends that are geniuses, like they're such geniuses that they can't function in the other world that I have, like the entrepreneurial business world. And I think that, like, in some ways I don't have, that, I mean, I have a bit of craziness inside me, of course, and I'm fraught with mental stuff that, is probably comes out in my art, and that's why I'm not more crazy, some inside myself. But I mean, I have that dark artistic kind of chaos hand all the time, but it's not, but I guess I have this other thing too. And it's just like, I have two things going on, and I guess I'm just not, I don't think of myself as so much of an artist that I can't do the other stuff. I think of myself as like enough of an artist so that I can get by in some way. I mean, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating. I'm just like, when I think about the writers that I love and like artists that I really look at, like Justin Vernon, like Bon Iver, like, he's like a visionary, in the studio as well as just lyrically and melodically. He's just got everything, Mm-hmm. And I just, when you have people like that in your life, like it automatically humbles you, you cannot, and I know that. And so I try to get better at what I do as an artist and really like take time that's just art time, like really, it's a discipline, but it's also like this, it's a discipline to make the time to just be an artist and not like, whatever, and just to let it go and let myself go to that place and, whatever, go hiking for 5 hours and work on a song the whole time while I'm hiking, whatever it takes. So I guess it is just two parts of me, but I'm also not like, I don't suffer from being such a genius that I can't do the other stuff, which I'm lucky, I'm lucky in that way. But also I know that the people that can write, like Sinead O'Connor or Ricky Lee or Patti Smith, like some of the people that I love so much, you know, they pay for their art. You know what I mean? Like in other ways. And I'm lucky that I don't have to pay for my art in some ways that my friends have to, you know? So I know that I think I have some perspective on that from just knowing who I know and being who I am, you know? And I'm with Emily, you know, she's a great song. I mean, that's humbling in itself, you know, just to be playing with Emily all the time because she's such a great songwriter and like great guitar player. And, you know, she's just kind of like naturally like gifted at everything in the music world. And so I don't know. I just have it. I guess I'm realistic about what's around me, and I've been put in my place enough. You know, when I was young and started out, I was very like, you know, I thought I was the greatest in the world or something, you know, at songwriter. I mean, I was put in my place quite a lot by producers and songwriters that made me realize that I'm not as good as I think I am, kind of thing. And so some of that's just maturity and humiliation. That can go a long way, you know, to be humiliated if you use it as a tool later, you know.
Maturity and humiliation might be the name of my autobiography when I'm older. We'll see. Well, listen, Amy Ray, thank you so much for being a guest on the Working Songwriter Podcast. Absolute honor to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's a great podcast, and I'm honored to be on it.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Amy Ray's latest release is entitled Chuck Will's Widow, available at amy-ray.com. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.